In a country as diverse as South Africa, where we have so many cultures, so many languages, and so many creative people trying to be independent, unique, and stand out above the rest, it's very difficult to do that. But don't worry. Today, I'm going to teach you 5 essential tips on how to visually represent your brand both online and offline, and to make sure that you are unique, that you have a presence, and that you stand out above the rest. My name's Jody Kolbee from Writer's Hand Studios, and welcome to the Creator's Guide, South Africa's guide to doing business in the creative industries. So look, last week we discussed the 5 pillars of personal branding, but today we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into this topic about visual branding and how to visually represent yourself. So let's start with tip number 1, visual branding. It's very important that everybody understands what your brand is about from a visual perspective. And the first point is to understand that visual branding is an emotional story. People need to understand the brand behind the brand, and that's all about you. You are your brand. As an entrepreneur in South Africa, we all represent our personal identities, our personal walks, and our personal goals and experiences. For writers, we always say, write what you know. For artists, we always say, paint what you feel. And at the end of the day, as a creative person, you've got to represent exactly who and what your brand is from a personal perspective. Let's start with a headshot. It's essential that you have decent headshots that echo who you are as a person. If somebody sees that headshot, they already know what your story is about. You pair that headshot up with your logo or your visual brand perspective, and there we go. You've already started telling a story that is synonymous one to another. The other thing you've got to understand is your typography. Whether it be your emails, anything that you are typing specifically, your typography has to be part of who you are. Whether you're using clean fonts, cursive fonts, decorative fonts, that tells people about what your brand is, who you are as a person, and whether they should take you seriously or not. The other thing is consistency. Consistency and monotony are very different from a branding perspective. It's one thing to be consistent, it's another thing to be monotonous. Do not be overbearing when it comes to your visual branding. You can always make sure that everything has the same ebb and flow, but make sure that whatever you are doing is consistent with what you did last week, the week before that, and for the future. The other step you want to make sure of is your color palette. A color palette can be diverse, it can be explorative, and it can be completely invigorating. But at the end of the day, your color palette has to echo what type of person you are. It's got to talk about who you are as an entrepreneur, what your personality is like. And these are things that are very difficult for entrepreneurs and local artists to understand. Your color palette cannot be all over the show. Just because you represent gay pride does not mean that you need to have the Rainbow Nation splashed across all of your emails, all of your social media, across your headshots all of the time. That does not tell me about who you are. That only tells me about one of your causes. At the end of the day, if you are a lawyer, I'm definitely not going to take a Rainbow Nation color palette across all of your visual branding seriously. You want to talk about you as a person. If you're a serious person, stick to mood blues. Talk about some grays, talk about some muted colors. If you're a lively person, you can pair up some of your grays with some splashes of reds and yellows here and there. If you are a foodie, red is synonymous with the food industry, and so is yellow and so is green. You want to keep things fresh, but consider your color palette very, very carefully because it's going to be part of the emotional journey. Try to add some of your creative flair into all of your corporate messaging, and that starts with your color palette and your typography. So step 2, be visible. I'm going to say that again, be visible. At the end of the day, you cannot expect people just to know who you are and find out about what you do in the ether, okay? It doesn't exist out there in the great somewhere. You've got to make sure that you are visible. Yes, we all have a Facebook page. Yes, we all have our own little profiles here and there. Everybody, one of our friends, etc., has our numbers. That's not visibility. That's just being connected. That's got nothing to do with getting yourself out there. You've already taken care of all of your visual branding by now. But at the end of the day, you've got to make sure that that visual branding is out there in the market. It's out there digitally, it's out there physically, and that everybody has a copy of who you are as a person. Make sure that you are on as many social media platforms as you possibly can so that your digital footprint goes far and wide. You want to make sure that you are using the right profile pictures, that you are ensuring that your Facebook cover picture is the right cover picture. The same applies to your Twitter account. The same applies to your Instagram and to your YouTube. You want to make sure that all of your digital channels represent exactly who you are as a person and how that connects you to your business, to your brand, and to your artistry. That's the essential step. And make sure that it's visible, both digital and offline. Alright, now we're going to come to tip number 3. Understanding your audience. You need to understand who you are and who your competitors are. It's part of identifying your audience. Understand what other like-minded people are doing. Understand how they are diversifying their portfolio. Understand how they are diversifying what they do. Some people just stick to one type of art. They stick to just graffiti art. But how can they stylize their graffiti a little bit more? Are you going to play with more fonts? Are you going to play with more shapes, more vivid colors? And why? What is going to happen inside of your visual branding, inside of the work that you do, that talks and speaks to your audience, about your audience, around your audience, and you? At the end of the day, you've got to understand how what you do connects with your audience and what increases the relevance to your audience and to you personally. If you and what you do does not resonate with you personally, then your brand is not being authentic to itself and to its audience. Ask yourself, what is the demographic of my audience? Are they young people? If they're young people, maybe your art needs to speak more along the lines of what young people are talking about right now. If they are older generation, you've got to think about generation X and Y, and you've got to start asking yourself, what are the baby boomers into? What are people that were born between the 70s and the 80s? What are their conversations? What are their struggles? What are their challenges? Your audience has very real issues and very real everyday things that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And your creativity and your art needs to speak to that audience. It is the only way that your brand is going to connect with them. Your personal brand needs to speak to all of these things, whether it be in the way that you communicate in your emails, whether it be in the way that you communicate on your social media and online channels, whether it be on your website, or whether it be on any of your headshots in any of those platforms. If you're doing live performances, the way that you are connecting with that audience is going to talk a lot about your understanding of that audience. Interpersonal connections with your audience makes the difference, and that's what marries your personal branding with your audience every single day. So, coming on to point number 4. The next step is all about being authentic and being unique. Those two things need to coexist. You've got to talk about your story. You've got to talk about what's authentic to you and add a little bit of that spice inside of what you do every single day. Being authentic is all about telling your story and making sure that your story is authentic to who you are and how it ties in with your brand. Your personal brand has a story. It's got to connect an audience, and it's got to connect you to what you do and what you do to that audience. That's how this marriage is going to work successfully. At the end of the day, you've got to make sure that your authentic story speaks and resonates with who you are personally first, and then it's got to resonate with your audience through the work that you put out there. I look at artists, writers and script writers like Mbogeni Ngema, who've written pieces like Woza Albert. Woza Albert talks about the South African story of how Mandela walked into freedom. It talks about the challenges of pre-apartheid and post-apartheid times. It talks about all of those things, but Mbogeni Ngema made sure that part of his history was established inside of there. And with his co-writer, Persim Twa, he made sure that all of their stories and the South African stories, their struggle, their challenge, and their day-to-day lives was woven inside of that workshop theatre piece. And if you don't understand that there is an evolution to your story, you will never be able to grow your authenticity, your story, and your brand. Now we need to think about how do we make our brands unique and authentic at the same time. You've got to put your own spin on it. If you love bold colors, make sure that those bold colors are always relevant. Even though you've started changing the design of your pieces, the way that you put out your songs, the way that you put out your graffiti art, etc., you've got to make sure that your own signature, your own unique identifier is established in each and every piece of work that you produce. The same can be said with your logo. Make your logo unique. You see a swoosh, you think Nike. Automatically. You see some squiggled font with red, you think Coca-Cola. You've got to think about how you can make your brand unique, how you can make it authentic to who you are, what you love doing, and what resonates with your audience. Being unique and being authentic fits together. So think about how you can make your brand authentic and unique. And that way, you'll ensure that your audience remembers you long after you've left. And when something comes up that reminds them about the work that you produce, about who you are as a brand, as an artist, as a creative, they will automatically make the two synonymous with one another. So think about that the next time you start producing content. Now let's think about our last tip. So step 5 is quite simple. Build real relationships. That's it. At the end of the day, your brand has to understand who are you connected with and what are you connected to. Building relationships is one of the most essential steps out of all of this, and this is what's going to solidify all of those 5 steps together. It's going to ensure that you are building relationships with your audience as well as with other like-minded people. It's too often the case in South Africa, especially amongst creatives, where people tend to block off other people. They don't want to share tips, they don't want to share information, they don't want to share what they do. And unfortunately, that is part of what connects us as a social economy. And we've got to understand that building those relationships are essential to making our brand known. It's essential for increasing the visibility of our brand, and it's essential in making sure that who we are and who we know forms part of our brand. Unfortunately, in the society that we have today, particularly in the creative industry, we find artists wanting to shelter themselves and wall themselves off with all of their knowledge, retaining that knowledge only for them. And unfortunately, as a creative industry, collectively, we all suffer. The reality is that as part of your personal branding experience is to make sure that you are connecting with one another. We've all got to connect with one another so that we understand what the challenges are, what we need to do next, and support each other's gigs as well. It takes one mistake and it takes one negative story to run around on social media for your brand to be completely decimated and damaged on all of your channels. That has taken you eons to build. Make sure that the type of relationships that you build are as authentic and unique as your brand. That way, your audience understands that this is who you are as a personality and that this is what forms part of the DNA of your brand. So putting all of those together, your relationship with your typography, with your visual branding, with what you are doing from a brand perspective, how unique you make your brand, with your authenticity, all of those things ties together with relationships. A relationship is exactly that. It is an intimate, interconnected thing that binds one thing to another. And remember that if you cannot understand what relationships make up the DNA of your brand, you will never understand how to make your brand stand out above the rest. So that's it, guys. Now you understand everything that you need to know about how to visually represent your brand, both online and offline. So that wraps it up from the Creator's Guide, making sure that the creative people in business in the South African market understand how to get their brands up and running and getting it out there. Once again, guys, I just want to thank you for watching us. Our website is www.thatnetwork.com, and that is www.that-network.com. You can also follow us on social media at that_networkza on all social media platforms. And remember, if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe with the button down below, and also remember to ring that bell to stay up to date with notifications every time we come out with an episode. Speaking of which, our next episode is on the 10th of March and every 2 weeks after that.